Imagine a world dominated not by a single country, but by an idea, a concept so powerful that it reshaped the destiny of entire continents and influenced the lives of millions. This was Pax Britannica, the British peace, a period of unparalleled dominance, where the sun truly never set on the British Empire. But was it truly a time of peace? Or was it a subtle form of control that changed the course of history forever? Was Pax Britannica a grand illusion, a mirage of stability and order in a world that was anything but? Or was it the greatest feat of diplomacy and military prowess the world has ever seen? Join us as we uncover the untold story of Pax Britannica, a story of power, ambition, and the balance between peace and dominance. This is a tale of empires built on blood and gold, of treaties signed in grand halls, and of nations brought under the heel of an empire that claimed to bring peace to the world on its own terms. The birth of an empire. Our story begins in the early 19th century, a time when Europe was engulfed in chaos. The Napoleonic Wars had ravaged the continent, leaving nations in ruins and old powers weakened. But from this turmoil, one nation rose to unprecedented heights: Britain. The defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo in 1815 marked the dawn of a new era, an era where Britain would not just be a player on the world stage, but the undisputed director. The British Empire was not born overnight. It was the result of centuries of exploration, conquest, and trade. From a small island nation in the North Atlantic, Britain expanded its reach across the seas. By the end of the 18th century, it controlled key territories in North America, the Caribbean, and India. But it was the 19th century that would see the empire reach its zenith. What drove this expansion? Was it a genuine desire to bring civilization to the uncivilized parts of the world, as many British officials claimed? Or was it the pursuit of wealth, power, and prestige? The answer, as with most things, lies somewhere in between. The British Empire was a complex machine, driven by a mix of idealism, greed, and a belief in its own superiority. The British East India Company, for example, was a commercial enterprise with its own private army, and it played a crucial role in the empire's expansion in Asia. But it was not just trade and conquest that expanded the empire, it was also diplomacy. Treaties, often signed under duress, brought more territories under British control, sometimes without a single shot being fired. Defining Pax Britannica. Pax Britannica, Latin for British peace, is often romanticized as a period of global tranquility under British rule. From 1815 to 1914, Britain maintained a relatively stable global order, preventing major conflicts and maintaining the status quo. But the reality is far more complex. This so-called peace was not a gift. It was a carefully orchestrated system of control, designed to benefit Britain above all. At the heart of Pax Britannica was the Royal Navy, the most powerful maritime force the world had ever seen. With its ironclad ships and global reach, the British Navy ensured that no nation could challenge Britain's supremacy on the seas. The Navy was not just a military force, it was the enforcer of British interests, a tool of diplomacy and coercion. The British statesman Lord Palmerston famously remarked, "The British Empire, though small in size, is great in power and influence." This influence extended far beyond Britain's shores, reaching every corner of the globe. But it was not always welcomed by those who found themselves under British rule. Pax Britannica was a double-edged sword. While it brought stability to many regions, it also suppressed local cultures, economies, and political systems. The imposition of British laws, education, and economic practices often led to the erosion of traditional ways of life. Resistance was inevitable, and it was met with force. The so-called Peace of Pax Britannica was, for many, a peace imposed at the barrel of a gun. The architects of peace. The architects of Pax Britannica were not just generals and admirals. They were diplomats, statesmen, and businessmen. Figures like Lord Castlereagh, who played a key role in the Congress of Vienna, helped to shape a new world order that would ensure British dominance for the next century. This was a time of great ambition, where the fate of nations was decided in smoke-filled rooms by men in tailored suits. By 1815, Britain had secured a network of strategic outposts, Gibraltar, Malta, the Cape of Good Hope, and others, that allowed it to control the world's most crucial maritime routes. These were not just military installations, they were the keys to Britain's global influence. Control of these choke points meant control of global trade, and with it, control of the global economy. The Royal Navy was the backbone of Pax Britannica. With its unmatched power, it could enforce Britain's will anywhere in the world. But this dominance was not just about military might, it was also about creating a perception of invincibility. The sight of a British warship in a foreign port was often enough to quell any thoughts of rebellion or defiance. But military power alone could not sustain an empire of this size. Diplomacy was just as important. British diplomats skillfully negotiated treaties that secured British interests, often at the expense of other nations. The use of gunboat diplomacy, the threat of military action to achieve diplomatic goals, became a hallmark of Pax Britannica. One of the most infamous examples of this was the Treaty of Nanking, signed in 1842 after the First Opium War. The treaty forced China to cede Hong Kong to Britain and open up its ports to British trade, including the opium trade. This was a clear demonstration of how Pax Britannica operated, a combination of military power, economic pressure, and diplomatic skill. The realities of imperial peace. But what did this peace really mean for those under British rule? For many, Pax Britannica was far from peaceful. The empire's expansion was often marked by violent conquests, forced treaties, and the suppression of local resistance. The British were masters of propaganda, presenting their rule as a civilizing mission. But behind the rhetoric lay a harsh reality. In India, the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857 revealed the fragility of British control and the harsh realities of imperial rule. The rebellion was a response to the British disregard for Indian customs and religions, and it was met with brutal suppression. Tens of thousands of Indians were killed, and entire villages were razed to the ground. The British response was so severe that it left a lasting scar on the Indian psyche. In Africa, the scramble for territory led to conflicts with other European powers and brutal subjugation of indigenous peoples. The Berlin Conference of 1884–85, where European powers divided Africa among themselves, was a clear example of how little regard was given to the people who actually lived there. The British Empire justified its actions by claiming to bring civilization and Christianity to Africa, but the reality was exploitation and violence. The British Empire's humanitarian justifications, like the abolition of slavery, were often overshadowed by its economic and strategic interests. In many cases, British policies disrupted traditional economies and societies, leading to poverty, famine, and social unrest. The so-called civilizing mission often did more harm than good, leaving a legacy of resentment and division that persists to this day. The economics of peace. At its core, Pax Britannica was as much about profit as it was about peace. The British Empire was a vast economic machine, and its stability depended on the uninterrupted flow of goods and resources. The empire was designed to benefit Britain, with colonies providing raw materials and markets for British goods. From the tea plantations of Ceylon to the cotton mills of Manchester, the empire's wealth was built on the backs of its colonies. The free trade policies that Britain championed were designed to benefit its industries, ensuring that raw materials flowed into British factories, while finished goods were exported around the world. This system created immense wealth for Britain, but it also entrenched poverty and underdevelopment in the colonies. But this economic dominance came at a cost. The Opium Wars with China, for example, were driven by Britain's desire to protect its lucrative opium trade, leading to conflicts that exposed the darker side of its global reach. The opium trade was not just a source of wealth, it was a tool of control, used to weaken and subjugate China. The British Empire's economic policies often prioritized profit over the well-being of local populations. The forced cultivation of cash crops in colonies like India and Egypt led to food shortages and famines, as land that had once been used to grow food for local consumption was now dedicated to producing cotton, tea, and other exports for the British market. The economic benefits of Pax Britannica were not evenly distributed. While Britain and its elites grew richer, many of the colonies were left impoverished. The extraction of resources and the exploitation of labor created deep inequalities that persist to this day. The legacy of Pax Britannica is not just one of political control, but also of economic domination. The beginning of the end. For over a century, Pax Britannica seemed unshakable. But as the 19th century gave way to the 20th, cracks began to appear in the facade of British dominance. The rise of new powers, Germany, Japan, the United States, challenged Britain's supremacy. The empire was still vast, but it was no longer unrivaled. World War I was a turning point. The British Empire emerged victorious, but the war had drained its resources and weakened its global position. The peace that had once seemed eternal was now under threat from new geopolitical realities. The war also exposed the fragility of the empire, as colonies began to demand more autonomy and independence. The interwar period was marked by economic hardship and political instability. The Great Depression of the 1930s further weakened the empire as trade declined and unemployment soared. At the same time, nationalist movements in the colonies gained momentum, demanding an end to British rule. World War II was the final blow. The British Empire was on the winning side, but the war left it exhausted and bankrupt. The United States emerged as the new global superpower, and Britain's role in the world was diminished. The empire that had once ruled the waves was now in decline. The legacy of Pax Britannica. In the aftermath of World War II, the British Empire began to unravel. One by one, colonies gained independence, and the world entered a new era of self-determination. Pax Britannica was no more, replaced by a new world order dominated by the United States and the Soviet Union. But the legacy of Pax Britannica endures. Its influence can still be felt in the global systems of trade, law, and international relations. The British Empire may have faded, but the idea of Pax Britannica, a world shaped by the values and interests of a dominant power, remains a potent force in history. The legacy of Pax Britannica is complex and contested, but it is undeniable. It shaped the modern world in profound ways, for better or for worse. So, was Pax Britannica truly a time of peace, or was it a carefully constructed illusion of control? The answer lies in the stories of those who lived through it, both the rulers and the ruled. Join us next time as we continue to explore the complex and often controversial history of empires that shaped our world.
If this story has intrigued you, then make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more captivating stories from the past.